History often remembers its great moments through triumphal arches and celebrated victories. Yet some of its most astonishing encounters happened far from capitals and chronicles, on lonely frontiers where no historian was meant to be watching. One such encounter took place in 36 BC in a desolate corner of Central Asia, where two civilizations unknowingly crossed paths. Rome and Han China, two empires that never officially met, stood face to face through a twist of fate, exile, and survival. The proof was not found in treaties or ambassadors, but on a battlefield, hidden inside an impossible fortress built by men who should not have been there at all. In the late summer of 36 BC, a Han army numbering nearly 40,000 marched westward across harsh terrain. Their destination was the stronghold of Jiji, a disgraced Xiongnu warlord who had fled deep into Central Asia after losing a brutal power struggle with his own brother. As the Han troops crested a final ridge, they stopped. Below them stood a fortress unlike any they had encountered before. At its core was an earthen wall, common across the region and instantly recognizable. But surrounding it was something profoundly unsettling, a tall wooden palisade constructed from interlocking logs, fitted together with careful engineering rather than nomadic improvisation. This was not steppe architecture. This was not Central Asian design. The Han officers studied the structure in silence. No Xiongnu leader built like this. No nomadic warlord understood timber fortifications in such detail. Something about the fortress felt foreign, deliberate, calculated, disciplined. Then the gates opened. 100 cavalry riders thundered out, performing the familiar nomadic show of force, speed, noise, and intimidation meant to unnerve the enemy. The Han commanders remained steady. They had faced such tactics many times before. But what followed defied all expectation. From behind the horsemen emerged another force, infantry. They marched in formation, shields raised, movements synchronized. They formed a tight square, locking shields edge to edge. At shouted commands, they advanced, rotated, and held position with mechanical precision. General Chen Tang realized, with growing disbelief, what he was seeing. This was the Roman testudo, a formation developed by the legions of the Mediterranean, appearing now, impossibly, thousands of miles east of Rome, beyond deserts, mountains, and political memory. For 17 years, Rome had wondered what became of its missing soldiers. Here was the answer. The mystery began in 53 BC, on the sun-scorched plains near the city of Carrhae. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's richest men and a member of the First Triumvirate, led 7 legions eastward into Parthian territory. Over 40,000 soldiers marched beneath his banners, veterans hardened by years of campaigning. This was not a defensive war. It was ambition made flesh. Crassus sought glory to rival Pompey and Julius Caesar. Victory in the east would elevate his name above theirs. But waiting for him was the Parthian general Surena, commanding a force barely 1/4 the size of Rome's army. 9,000 horse archers, 1,000 cataphracts. On parchment, Rome's victory seemed inevitable. Reality told a different story. The Parthians refused close combat. Instead, they encircled the Roman army and unleashed their most feared tactic, the Parthian shot. Horse archers rode in endless circles, firing arrows even as they retreated. The sky darkened with missiles. Roman infantry, trained for shield-to-shield fighting, could not engage their enemy. Each advance was met with withdrawal. Each pause brought another storm of arrows. The desert sun burned relentlessly. Water supplies dwindled. Auxiliary units collapsed first. Fear followed. Discipline frayed. When exhaustion finally hollowed the legions, Surena gave the signal. The cataphracts charged. 1,000 armored cavalry slammed into Roman ranks already breaking apart. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. By nightfall, 20,000 Romans lay dead. 10,000 escaped westward, carrying news of catastrophe back to Rome. but 10,000 more, an entire legion, were captured alive. Crassus himself was killed during negotiations. His severed head was sent east as a trophy. Rome had lost an army in a single day. After Carrhae, Roman records fall eerily silent. What happened to the captured soldiers? No triumphant return, no mass execution, just absence. Years later, the poet Horace mocked their fate, claiming they lived on as disgraced husbands to barbarian wives, serving foreign kings. But beneath the sarcasm lay an uncomfortable truth. Rome did not know what had become of them. The Parthians, however, understood their value. These were not ordinary captives. They were trained legionaries, masters of discipline, fortification, and formation warfare. Killing 10,000 such men would waste a priceless asset. But keeping them near Roman borders would invite rebellion. So the Parthians chose exile. According to Pliny the Elder, the prisoners were relocated to Margiana, in the city of Merv, far to the east, at the empire's frontier. There, they guarded vital trade routes linking Persia, Central Asia, and the Silk Road. For 17 years, the Romans lived in enforced service. They defended caravans. They fortified oases. They trained local troops. They married, raised children, and adapted to a life utterly alien to the republic they once served. But they did not forget who they were. Their formations endured. Their discipline survived. Empires shift. Borders move. In 36 BC, Gigi Chanyu, defeated and desperate, fled west after losing a civil war among the Xiongnu. He needed soldiers capable of standing against the Han Empire. The Parthians had such soldiers. Roman infantry, hardened by exile and frontier warfare, were rented to Gigi's cause. And so, in a remote valley at the edge of the known world, history bent inward on itself. Roman military doctrine, born in Italy, broken at Carrhae, preserved in exile, now faced the most disciplined army in the East, the Han legions. Neither side understood the true significance of the moment. Yet for a brief, extraordinary instant, the finest infantry tradition of Rome stood against China's imperial war machine, linked not by diplomacy, but by survival. The meeting of empires had finally occurred. Not in Rome, not in Chang'an, but in silence, beneath wooden walls that should never have existed, at the forgotten edge of the ancient world. While the fate of Rome's lost soldiers was unfolding in silence on the distant frontiers of Parthia, a very different drama was taking shape more than 5,000 miles to the east. On the western edge of the Han Empire, desperation was brewing, not among defeated men, but within an ambitious officer who stood outside the aristocratic order of his age. Chun Tang, newly appointed vice commander of the Protectorate of the Western regions, was not born into power. Unlike the celebrated generals whose names filled Han chronicles, men such as Hua Xiubing or Li Guangli, sons of noble families groomed for command, Chun Tang came from poverty so severe it bordered on disgrace. As a young man, he survived by borrowing money, relying on neighbors, and enduring public humiliation when his debts became impossible to conceal. In a society that valued lineage as much as talent, poverty was a permanent mark against him. Doors closed before he could knock. Patronage eluded him entirely. But hardship shaped Chun Tang in ways privilege never could. Unable to rely on family connections, he relied instead on knowledge. He studied relentlessly military theory, frontier administration, diplomacy, and the shifting alliances of Central Asia. Over time, he built an encyclopedic understanding of the Western regions. Every trade corridor, every tribal rivalry, every fragile balance of power between oasis kingdoms and nomadic confederations. Where court generals saw only distant barbarian lands, Chun Tang saw a living system, one that could be manipulated, leveraged, and if necessary, broken. So when intelligence reports reached him that Gigi Chanyu, a defeated Xiongnu warlord, had constructed a fortified base deep inside Kangju territory, Chun immediately recognized what others dismissed. This was not merely another nomadic refuge. It was a strategic opening. The fortress stood near the Talas River, in territory that today lies within Kazakhstan. From the Han capital of Chang'an, the straight-line distance exceeded 3,000 kilometers. In reality, an army would have to march nearly 5,000 kilometers to reach it through some of the most lethal terrain on Earth. Any court official evaluating the situation from Chang'an would have reached the same conclusion. Such an expedition was impossible. The route westward passed first through the Taklamakan Desert, ominously known as the Sea of Death. Armies crossing it faced weeks of marching between isolated oases, where a single navigational error could doom thousands to thirst. Beyond the desert rose the Pamir Mountains, where peaks soared above 4,000 meters. There, altitude sickness, freezing winds, and sudden storms claimed lives long before any enemy appeared. The Han Empire had learned these lessons the hard way. During an earlier campaign against Qing, tens of thousands of soldiers had set out from the heartland, only for a fraction to return. The western frontier was notorious, not for defeat by enemies, but for annihilation by geography itself. Yet Chen Tang was not thinking like a court general. He was thinking like a frontier commander. The protectorate of the western regions did not depend solely on armies from the capital. It maintained its own permanent garrisons, veteran troops hardened by years of service in hostile climates. These men were not ceremonial soldiers. They were survivors, accustomed to scarcity, isolation, and sudden violence. They were also exceptionally well equipped. Han frontier soldiers carried full lamellar armor, iron swords, halberds, and, most importantly, the Han crossbow, a weapon feared across Central Asia for its range and penetrating power. Contemporary military assessments suggest that one fully equipped Han infantryman could equal 10 nomadic warriors in battlefield effectiveness. In modern terms, these were not standard troops. They were elite forces. Chen Tang's plan was radical. Instead of waiting for reinforcements from Chang'an, a process that would take at least a year, he proposed immediate action. Under the authority of the protectorate, he would mobilize the frontier garrisons and supplement them with conscripts from the network of vassal states across the western regions. There were 48 such kingdoms and city-states under Han influence. Their rulers held official imperial seals, symbols of their submission to Han authority. In theory, their armies could be summoned in the emperor's name. Chen Tang intended to do exactly that. His superior, the Protector General Gan Yinshou, immediately understood the brilliance of the proposal and its danger. A campaign of this scale required explicit authorization from the emperor himself. Sending a request to Chang'an and awaiting a reply would take at least 6 months. Chen Tang knew what 6 months meant. Jiji might flee deeper into the steppe. Winter snows could close the mountain passes. Political alliances could fracture. The moment would be lost forever. There was only one way forward, and it was illegal. Chen Tang forged an imperial edict, invoking the emperor's authority without permission. Across the western regions, banners were raised. Garrisons mobilized. Allied kingdoms were ordered to contribute troops. When Gan Yinshou finally realized what was happening, the machinery of war was already in motion. According to later accounts, Chen Tang confronted his superior personally, sword drawn. "The arrow is already on the bowstring," he declared. "The great army is about to march. Will you attempt to stop it with your own strength alone?" It was the ultimate gamble. If Chen Tang succeeded, he would be hailed as a savior of the frontier, a man who destroyed a dangerous enemy and secured the empire's western flank. If he failed, he would be executed as a traitor who had dragged the Han Empire into an unauthorized war. There would be no forgiveness. By the time any response from Chang'an could arrive, the army was already marching. 10,000 elite Han soldiers advanced alongside 30,000 auxiliaries from the western regions. The force split into 2 massive columns, crossing the Pamir Mountains from opposite directions. The southern column passed through the Yuan territory, while the northern column marched through Wusun lands, crushing a Kangju detachment that attempted to block their route. When the two columns reunited deep inside Kangju territory, they formed a single, unstoppable host, 40,000 strong, hardened by terrain and unified by momentum. Ahead of them stood Gigi's fortress. Inside its walls waited soldiers trained in Roman discipline, forged by exile and survival. The stage was set for a confrontation no historian of the ancient world could have imagined. The military system of Rome, preserved far from home, about to face the full, unleashed power of the Han Empire. From the very beginning, the Han commanders enforced absolute discipline. Looting was forbidden. Civilians were not to be harmed. No villages were to be burned. This restraint, combined with the sheer size of the advancing army, produced an unexpected result. Kangju nobles, long resentful of Gigi Chanyu's cruelty and heavy-handed rule, began to defect. They came quietly, offering intelligence, supplies, and guidance through unfamiliar terrain. The Han advance no longer moved blind. Every river crossing, every road, every weak point was revealed in advance. What had begun as a daring gamble was turning into a methodical encirclement. Inside the fortress, shock spread. When Gigi Chanyu received reports of the Han army's approach, he could scarcely believe them. An imperial force, marching 5,000 kilometers into the heart of Central Asia, defied every precedent. His advisors urged immediate flight. The steppe had always favored mobility. Escape had saved nomad rulers for generations. But Gigi hesitated. To abandon the fortress with only a small escort would leave him vulnerable to ambush by Kangju rivals who despised him. Worse, flight would signal weakness. He chose instead to gamble on endurance, believing the Han army, so far from its base, would eventually starve, fracture, or retreat. Desperate to buy time, Gigi sent envoys bearing gifts and an offer of submission. He would send his own son to Chang'an as a hostage, acknowledging Han authority. Chen Tang's response was chilling in its calm. "The Son of Heaven," he replied, "has heard that you dwell in this poor and distant land and fears you may be suffering. He has sent us to welcome you and your family back." There would be no negotiations. When the Han army finally arrived before Gigi's fortress, the answer to a 17-year mystery stood plainly before them. The stronghold possessed two distinct defensive layers. The inner wall was earthen, entirely typical of Central Asian construction. But surrounding it was something utterly foreign, a wooden stockade built from interlocking logs, fitted together with precision and intent. Nomads did not build like this. Colorful banners fluttered from the battlements. Hundreds of armored soldiers stood ready on the walls. The Han army established its camp roughly 3 miles away, along the Talas River, and prepared to observe. Then came the moment that changed everything. 100 mounted warriors rode out from the gates, galloping back and forth in a familiar nomadic display of bravado. The Han commanders remained unmoved. Such demonstrations were expected. But then the gates opened again. This time, infantry emerged. Another 100 soldiers marched out and formed disciplined ranks on either side of the entrance. Han records describe the formation as resembling overlapping fish scales, tight, orderly, deliberate. Shields locked together. Commands were executed instantly. The men drilled openly before the enemy, their movements precise and unified. This was the smoking gun. Nomadic armies did not employ heavy infantry. They did not fight in dense formations. And they certainly did not conduct disciplined pre-battle drills meant to provoke and intimidate an opponent. Only one military tradition trained soldiers to fight this way. These were Roman legionaries, survivors of Carrhae, still maintaining their discipline after 17 years of exile on the Parthian frontier. Their famous testudo formation had been adapted to local conditions, but its essence remained unmistakable. Yet discipline alone could not overcome physics. Facing 40,000 Han soldiers armed with mass crossbows, Roman training offered no protection. Chen Tang wasted no time. He ordered his crossbowmen forward. At the first volley, both the infantry and cavalry withdrew rapidly behind the gates. War drums thundered across the valley. From every direction, the Han army advanced. Garrison troops moved forward behind massive shields while crossbowmen filled the sky with bolts. Auxiliary forces surged toward the moat, filling it and sealing off escape routes. Under the relentless storm of missiles, defenders on the earthen wall fell quickly. Then the Han brought fire. Bundles of wood were stacked against the outer stockade and set ablaze. Flames climbed the wooden walls, illuminating the night sky. Smoke rolled across the battlefield as the fortress began to burn. Under cover of darkness, Zhiji launched a desperate cavalry charge, hoping to break through the encirclement. It failed instantly. Waiting crossbowmen cut the riders down before they could gain momentum. Zhiji himself fought on the walls, armored and defiant. His wives and concubines stood beside him, armed and refusing to flee. An arrow struck his face. Blood poured down his armor. Around him, most of his consorts were killed where they stood. By midnight, the outer wooden defenses were fully consumed by fire. A relief force of 10,000 Kangju cavalry arrived and attempted repeated charges against the Han lines. But against disciplined formations and concentrated crossbow fire, mobility meant nothing. Rider after rider fell. After suffering devastating losses, the Kangju abandoned Zhiji and fled. At dawn, the final assault began. Han soldiers swarmed over the earthen walls. Fighting erupted in the streets. Zhiji retreated toward his palace, but Han troops pursued relentlessly. In brutal close-quarters combat, he was mortally wounded, then beheaded. He became the first and only Xiongnu supreme ruler ever killed in battle by the Han Empire. When the fighting ended, the numbers spoke for themselves. 1,518 defenders lay dead. 145 were captured alive. Those survivors likely included the final Roman legionaries, men who had marched east with Crassus 17 years earlier and now stood at the end of their long exile. They were not merely prisoners. They were the last Romans ever to face the Han Empire in battle. Chen Tang's fate afterward mirrored his character. He was rewarded with noble rank, then denounced by Confucian officials for corruption and defiance. He was stripped of office, imprisoned, and later reinstated when his military brilliance was once again required. But his words endured. Let those who dare challenge the great Han be hunted down, no matter how far they flee. The lesson remains timeless. Fixed defenses become death traps when facing superior firepower and mobility. Zhiji's decision to abandon nomadic warfare for static fortification sealed his fate, just as Chen Tang's audacious logistics reshaped the limits of empire.